If you've worked your way through the books of Kings or the books of Chronicles, you will have heard the retelling of the history of God's people, how the kingdom that was once ruled over by good King David was fractured in two, and each half turned to fight against the other. The northern kingdom was ruled over by a rebellious king. The southern kingdom was ruled over by the rightful king, that is, the king in the line of David. All of the northern kings were exclusively evil. They introduced idolatry almost immediately and never did come back to God wholeheartedly. The southern kingdom, meanwhile, was more of a mixed bag. Roughly half the kings faithfully followed God, and the other half selfishly set themselves up against the living God and sought their own glory. But eventually, the northern king was defeated by its enemies, the Assyrian Empire. They swept in, they killed most of the people, and carted the rest off into captivity, resettling the land with people from other parts of their Assyrian Empire, people who did not know and love the Lord. About 100 years after that, the same thing happened down south, but it was not the Assyrian Empire who destroyed them, it was the Babylonian Empire who came in. And then, in a series of deportations, they took all the brightest and the best out of the land and off into exile. However, as we noted at the end of the book of Kings and the end of Chronicles, God had always promised that somehow, apparently against all the odds, the people would be brought back to the promised land. Through Jeremiah, in fact, he even gave a timeline. It would be 70 years, God said, that the people of Judah would have to endure exile, and then they would come home. Now, for most, if not all of those 70 years, the people of Israel must have thought that prophecy was impossible. They would have been able to guess at no series of circumstances that would lead to them coming home. And yet, as we see in Ezra chapter 1, the Lord was not relying upon his people for the fulfillment of his promise. In fact, here we are reminded yet again of the extraordinary sovereignty of God. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout his realm and also to put it in writing. This is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says. Now, before we get to what he said, let's first establish who he is and why he said what he said. This is Cyrus, king of Persia. Now, I just mentioned that it was the Babylonians who took the people of God off into exile, but it's the Persians who are the new superpower on the block. They have come in and defeated the Babylonians, and Cyrus is the new king of this empire, the Persian Empire. So that's who he is, and we'll come to what he says in just a moment, but why did he say this? Well, ultimately, the answer is given in verse 1, because the Lord moved his heart, which is remarkable, isn't it? In Proverbs 21, we read that the king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he will. You imagine turning on a tap for a moment, and as you put your hand into the water, it doesn't resist you. It doesn't put up much of a fight against you at all. If you want to push that water around, you can do it without trouble. The Bible says that even the hearts of kings, powerful, important, impressive, accomplished, intimidating, self-exalting, enemy-crushing kings, even these kinds of people can be moved by the hand of God without any trouble at all for him. That is exactly what we are seeing here. Now, Cyrus, no doubt, had his own reasons in his mind for why this was a good idea. In fact, we know from the history books that he did this not exclusively for the Jews, but for many of the people who had been exiled from foreign lands under the Babylonian resettlement program. He did this because he wanted to win the favor of the people. They would still, of course, be under his rule. They would be taxed heavily on all that they produced. They could be conscripted into his army if he needed them to fight. But they could go back to their historic homelands and make a fresh start of life all over again. The history books tell us he had his own reasons. The Bible tells us the ultimate reason behind it all. It's that God made a promise and he always keeps his promises. And therefore, he moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation. This proclamation, as it relates to the Jews, is that he has had some sort of a supernatural interaction with God. He wants there to be a temple in Jerusalem, and therefore, he says, any of this God's people may go up to Jerusalem to build the temple of the Lord, the God of Israel, the God who is in Jerusalem. And may their God be with them, he says. In fact, more than that, he insists that people living alongside Jews should aid them in their aim by resourcing them with silver, gold, goods and livestock and free will offerings for the temple of God in Jerusalem. And so indeed, that is exactly what happened. There is a long way still to go for the Jews in terms of resettling the land, rebuilding the temple, recommitting themselves to life under the living God. But a remarkable thing has happened. In some ways, it is to the surprise of everyone who hears about it. And in other ways, at least for those whose trust is in the Lord, it doesn't surprise us at all, does it? God always keeps his promises, and he is not short on power to accomplish what he has promised to do.